Dawn broke gently over the Kruger Nature Reserve, casting a golden hue across the savannah and creeping slowly into the corners of the medical enclosure. The light fell softly on the figure of a black dog, curled tightly in the farthest corner of her kennel, her chest rising and falling so slowly that at times it was hard to tell if she was breathing at all. Her name was Camila, a mixed-breed dog with a small white patch on her chest, once full of life, now hollowed by loss. Just 3 days earlier, Camila had gone through the ordeal of childbirth. She had carried 5 premature puppies to term, but complications during delivery stole every last one from her. Now her body ached with emptiness, not just from the physical trauma, but from the cruel silence that followed. Her body, unaware of the tragedy, continued to produce milk, driven by nature's stubborn rhythm, by the hormonal surges of prolactin that flowed through her veins. But there were no mouths to feed, no tiny paws seeking warmth, only her, alone. She didn't eat. She barely moved. Her dark brown eyes stared through the bars of her kennel with a kind of vacancy that no medicine could treat, a shell of what she had been, and those who knew dogs truly knew them, understood what they were seeing. Not laziness, not stubbornness. Grief. Postpartum depression is not exclusive to humans. Zoologists have long documented cases in mammals, especially those capable of forming strong maternal bonds like dogs. The symptoms were all there in Camila: lethargy, withdrawal, lack of appetite, and the haunting disconnection from everything around her. It was as if her world had ended, and in many ways it had. Camila had not always been here. Just weeks before, she belonged to a farming family in a rural region beyond the edge of the reserve. But when her belly grew and her movements slowed, the affection she'd once received disappeared. In that part of the world, dogs were often tools, not companions. Her pregnancy was seen not as a delicate condition, but an inconvenience. And so, one morning, they left her by the roadside like forgotten trash, a sack of bones and sorrow with nothing but the instinct to survive driving her forward. It was there that a reserve patrol team found her, lying near a dusty trail, panting hard, her ribs visible beneath her coat. The tests showed dangerously low blood glucose, signs of dehydration and inflammation from internal strain. They rushed her to the medical station. By then, it was already too late for her puppies. All the team could do was stabilize her body. Her heart? That would take longer. Behind the one-way observation glass, Dr. Howard Mitchell watched her. A man of 50 with greying temples and the gentle patience of someone who'd spent his life with creatures few dared to understand. He'd worked with wildlife for over 2 decades, rescued rhinos, stitched up lions, hand-fed orphaned hyenas. And yet, something about Camila held him still. People often made the mistake of projecting human emotions onto animals, but Howard knew better. What Camila was going through wasn't fantasy, it was biology. The limbic system, the emotional core of mammals, fired in patterns that mirrored ours. Her heartbreak wasn't imagined, it was encoded deep within her nervous system. She hadn't barked since arriving. Not a whimper, not a growl. She simply existed, like a ghost. Sometimes she would press her nose to the corner of her kennel, not in curiosity, but in a repetitive, absent-minded motion, as if hoping that with enough pressure she could push through the wall and escape whatever pain clung to her. The veterinary assistants tried. Soft words, warm meals, favourite toys. Nothing worked. She ignored them all. Only when someone mentioned the word puppy did she blink once, slowly, as if remembering a dream too painful to revisit. Howard wrote in his notes that day, "Severe psychological trauma post-parturition. Hormonal state consistent with maternal preparation, but no offspring. Emotional expression, withdrawal, prognosis unclear." And yet, somewhere in that darkness, there was still a flicker, a faint pulse of life. Her body was trying to prepare for motherhood, even if the universe had denied her the chance. Milk leaked from her glands, a bitter reminder of what had been taken. The reserve's medical wing was usually a place of recovery. Rescued antelope, young warthogs injured in territorial disputes, the occasional pangolin suffering from poaching-related wounds. But Camila's case was different. Hers wasn't a broken limb or infected bite. It was something harder to see, and even harder to fix. That afternoon, clouds began to gather in the distance. Thunder rolled faintly on the horizon, but Howard remained beside the glass, watching her. He didn't know it yet, but something was coming. something that would change Camila's life forever. He stood up to stretch when a sharp knock came at the door. Hannah, his assistant, stepped in, her face pale. "They just radioed from the Eastern Patrol," she said breathlessly. "You need to see this, now." Howard didn't ask questions. He followed her down the hall to the radio station. The voice on the other end was crackled but urgent. "We found a cub, Leopard, alone. Mother's gone. Poachers, bullet casings at the site." Howard's heart sank. Poaching was illegal, but still it thrived, especially targeting big cats. Leopards were solitary, elusive, and tragically valuable. Their skins could fetch thousands. Their lives, to many, were worth less than money. "Is the cub alive?" he asked, already preparing mentally. "Barely," came the reply. "We're bringing him in." Howard exhaled slowly. A new emergency, a new life hanging in the balance. Back in her kennel, Camila had not moved, but the winds of change were already turning. Two broken lives were about to intersect. One, a mother with no child. The other, a child with no mother. And in the vast wilderness of the Kruger Reserve, something extraordinary was about to begin. The emergency vehicle pulled into the reserve's medical bay just after sunset. A faint whimper echoed from within the crate as Howard and Hannah carefully lifted it from the back. Inside, wrapped in a thermal blanket, was the leopard cub. His breathing was shallow, his tiny chest barely rising. There was no time for hesitation. They rushed him into the treatment room. Under the stark fluorescent lights, the cub's condition became horrifyingly clear. His small body, estimated to be only 2 weeks old, was dangerously thin. His temperature hovered at 36.1 degrees Celsius, far below the normal 38.5 degrees Celsius for leopard cubs. His paws were cold. His skin lacked elasticity, a clear sign of dehydration, and his eyes, still in the early stages of development, were crusted and dull. On his right hind leg, a raw, infected wound pulsed angrily. Blood work later confirmed what the team already feared, a skyrocketing white blood cell count. The infection had spread. They named him Atlas. Howard worked quickly, calling on every protocol he had used in 2 decades of wildlife emergencies. Ringer's lactate solution was administered subcutaneously to replenish fluids and correct the dangerous electrolyte imbalance. Broad-spectrum antibiotics were injected to halt the infection. A temperature-controlled incubator was prepared, and Atlas was carefully placed inside, bundled in soft cloths that simulated the warmth of a mother's body. The room was kept at a humid 27 degrees Celsius, the air heavy but essential for survival. But physical treatment could only go so far. "He's stable for now," Howard murmured, eyes glued to the monitors. "But it's not enough." Hannah nodded solemnly. "It's the bond, isn't it?" Howard didn't respond immediately. He knew what she meant. In big cats, especially leopards, maternal bonding is not optional. It's survival. From grooming to warmth, from the mother's heartbeat to her scent, the bond forms a neurological foundation for life. Without it, even a cub rescued from the brink might lose the will to live. "He doesn't just need to be fed," Howard finally said. "He needs to feel safe, connected." That night, Howard refused to leave the medical bay. He sat beside Atlas's enclosure in silence, listening to the hum of machines, the soft hisses of oxygen flow, the gentle creak of the structure under the night wind. Occasionally, Atlas's body would twitch, eyelids fluttering in sleep. REM cycles. Dreams. What does a leopard cub dream of after such loss? Does the brain seek out the mother's scent, her warmth, her heartbeat? Howard stared at the fragile creature and thought about Camila. 3 days ago, she had been almost unresponsive. Her world shattered by the loss of her puppies. Her body still full of milk, her instincts left with nowhere to go, a physiological state locked in limbo. And now, just across the corridor, lay another broken soul, smaller, weaker, but desperately needing what she had to give. Howard's mind raced through the science. He thought of oxytocin, the hormone of love, still likely surging in Camila's bloodstream. Prolactin levels, too, remained high after giving birth. Together, they created a cocktail of chemical signals in the brain designed for one thing: care, comfort, motherhood, even if the child was gone. In Atlas's case, formula milk had been prepared, rich in taurine, protein balanced for big cats. But no formula could replicate the antibodies in natural milk. No lab-made solution could imitate the security of a mother's touch. "We might lose him," Hannah whispered when she returned just after 3 a.m. Howard turned to her, his face tense but determined. "Not if we try something unorthodox." She raised a brow. "You're thinking what I think you're thinking." "Camila," he said softly. "She's still producing milk, still waiting for something, someone. Maybe this is what nature intended, even if it's not what science planned." "Howard, that's a dog. This is a leopard." He nodded. "I know. Different species, different instincts. But maternal instinct? That's something deeper. There are universal triggers, baby cries, body size, proportion. Conrad Lorenz talked about baby schema, remember? Large heads, big eyes, they stimulate caregiving behavior across species. Maybe we can tap into that." "And what if it doesn't work?" Hannah asked. "What if she reacts violently? We prepare, we monitor closely, but we give them the chance to meet safely, carefully. Let her decide." There was a long pause. Then Hannah sighed, shoulders tense. "Okay, let's do it." By sunrise, preparations were underway. A special room was selected, temperature regulated, softly lit, lined with blankets and covered in noise-dampening material. An infrared camera was mounted discreetly in the corner, allowing the team to observe without disturbing the moment. Howard carried Atlas gently, wrapped in fleece, his body still too weak to react. Meanwhile, Hannah led Camila down the corridor, slowly giving her time to adjust. The mixed-breed dog walked sluggishly, her tail limp, eyes dull. As they entered the room, she paused, sniffing the unfamiliar air but showing no aggression. Howard placed Atlas on a cushioned mat, 2 meters away from her. "Let them find each other naturally," he whispered, stepping back. Silence followed. Camila lay down, head resting between her paws, her gaze distant. Atlas lay curled up, breath shallow, motionless, save for the occasional twitch of his ears. 10 minutes passed. Then, a tiny sound, so faint it could be missed entirely. A cry, weak, unsure, but unmistakably the call of a child in need. Camila's ears twitched, the first movement she had made in hours. Another cry, softer this time. Her head lifted, her eyes, for the first time since her loss, focused. She stood slowly as if waking from a long nightmare. Her body was stiff, her steps cautious. She approached the small creature with trembling curiosity. Nose lowered, she sniffed. Then came the moment no one dared hope for. Camila licked Atlas, once gently, then again, cleaning, soothing, accepting. The team held their breath as Howard motioned to assist the next step. With extreme care, they guided Atlas toward her belly. For a moment, it seemed awkward, unfamiliar, but then, miraculously, the cub found a nipple and latched. A weak suckle, then another, and then strength. Camila didn't flinch. Her eyes remained open, wide with something almost unnameable. Surprise, instinct, perhaps even joy. Her body curved protectively around Atlas, a mother's arc forming around her new child. The room was silent, except for the sound of steady nursing. Later, when Atlas fell asleep, full and content, Camila remained awake. She did not move. She watched him with a gaze that had changed, no longer hollow, but alive with purpose. By the time morning sun reached the window, something sacred had begun. Something fragile, yes, but real. 2 lost souls had collided in their grief, and through that something new was taking shape. A bond, not written in blood, but born of need, of instinct, of something deeper than either could ever understand. And it was only the beginning. The sun rose quietly over the Kruger Reserve the next morning, casting a warm orange glow over the low buildings and grassy clearings. Inside the special recovery room, the infrared camera continued to roll in silence. The footage from the night before had already become something of a legend among the medical team. No one expected what had unfolded, and yet it was all there. The trembling cub, the grieving dog, and the soft rhythm of healing set in motion by a single, instinctive act of love. Camila had not slept. All night she remained curled around the fragile body of the leopard cub, her head resting protectively near him, her dark eyes blinking slowly as if afraid to look away. Every now and then she would sniff him gently, as if to reassure herself that he was still there, still breathing. Atlas, for his part, had stopped shivering. His tiny body, once stiff with tension, was now warm and pliant. He slept deeper than he had since being brought in, a true sleep, safe, secure, and full-bellied. Howard arrived just after 6. He didn't need to ask how the night had gone. One look through the observation window said everything. Camila's posture, the steady rise and fall of her chest, the way her tail curled slightly around the cub, all told the same story. A bond had formed. She didn't eat for 3 days, Hannah whispered as she brought in a tray of food. "Let's see what she does now." They opened the door gently and set the food down near her. Camila lifted her head and sniffed the air. Then slowly, almost cautiously, she stood, looked back at the sleeping cub, and approached the bowl. For the first time since her puppies were lost, she ate. Not ravenously, but with purpose, as if she understood now that her strength mattered. Back in the lab, Howard updated the medical notes. Atlas's vitals had stabilized overnight. His hydration levels were improving. The wound on his hind leg had stopped leaking and showed early signs of response to antibiotics. Most importantly, his body temperature had returned to normal. But beyond the numbers, it was his demeanor that had changed. The desperate clinging to life had transformed into something steadier, like trust. In the following days, that trust deepened. Camila assumed her new role with a kind of calm, quiet devotion that stunned even the most seasoned researchers. She cleaned Atlas thoroughly, licking behind his ears, his tail, and the soft folds of his neck. She lay beside him at night, adjusting her body to form a curved cocoon around him. When he cried in his sleep, she nuzzled him awake. When he stirred, she licked his nose and guided him back to her side. Nursing sessions became more efficient, and the cub began to grow visibly stronger. His limbs filled out. His fur thickened. His eyes, once cloudy and unfocused, now tracked movement with curiosity. A week after their first contact, he tried to climb over her back, not very successfully, but Camila didn't mind. She simply rolled slightly, allowing him to slide off gently onto the blanket. Howard watched all of this unfold with cautious optimism. Each milestone Atlas reached, weight gain, strength, mobility, was logged with careful precision. But what truly captivated the staff was the emotional evolution between the two animals. There was no mistaking it. Camila was no longer just tolerating Atlas. She was raising him. And he, in turn, was beginning to mirror her behavior. At 2 weeks into their pairing, Atlas began following Camila's movements with unmistakable intention. If she stood, he tried to stand. If she moved to the corner of the room, he wobbled behind her, his still developing muscles doing their best to keep up. He responded to her vocalizations, quiet whines and soft chuffs, as if they were a language he was learning. 3 weeks after their introduction, Howard made a bold decision. "We need to move them," he said during a staff meeting. "He's outgrowing the nursery room. We need a space that allows him to move, explore, develop motor skills, but we're not separating them, we're moving them together." The team nodded in agreement. It was clear to everyone that whatever lines once existed between dog and leopard had long since blurred. The bond between Camila and Atlas wasn't just working, it was thriving. They prepared a new enclosure, a semi-natural space on the reserve's edge, designed to mimic the terrain a young leopard might encounter. It was enclosed for safety, but filled with natural elements. Rocks to climb, trees to scratch, shaded areas for rest, and small logs to hide behind or explore. The transfer was done with care. Camila walked beside the crate containing Atlas, never straying more than a step away. When they reached the new area, Howard opened the door slowly, allowing both animals to adjust. Camila stepped in first, nose to the ground, tail wagging slowly, ears alert. She explored the perimeter before returning to the crate and waiting. Atlas emerged a moment later. The cub, now stronger and more confident, took cautious steps onto the grass. The texture beneath his paws made him pause, then spring slightly in place. Camila nudged him from behind, her nose encouraging. He sniffed, tasted the air, then bounded forward with a clumsy grace unique to young predators. And so a new routine began. Each morning they walked the enclosure together, Camila leading, Atlas stumbling after. She showed him how to track movement through scent, pausing often to let him investigate. She growled lowly when birds flew overhead, teaching him awareness. She barked once at a rustle in the bushes, causing Atlas to crouch low and listen. She was teaching him. Not as a leopard would, but as a mother does. Of course, there were differences. Camila couldn't climb trees. She didn't know how to stalk prey like a leopard. But Atlas didn't seem to mind. He adapted. He learned what he could from her. Alertness, caution, attentiveness, and blended it with instincts buried deep in his blood. At night, they curled up on a large flat rock near the center of the enclosure. The camera would capture it again and again. Camila lying protectively, Atlas resting his head against her chest, lulled by the familiar heartbeat he now trusted. For Howard and the rest of the team, it was like witnessing something sacred, a kind of redemption. Two creatures, both abandoned by fate, now tethered by something stronger than biology, something the textbooks didn't fully explain, something that felt like destiny. And yet, as Atlas grew stronger and more confident, a new thought began to surface, a quiet question that lingered in Howard's mind during his late-night notes. What happens when instincts awaken? Because no matter how deep the bond, Atlas was still a leopard, and the wild doesn't wait forever. 6 weeks passed, and the transformation within the special enclosure at Kruger Reserve was nothing short of astonishing. What had begun as a desperate pairing of two broken souls had become a living miracle. Atlas, once teetering on the edge of death, now padded confidently through the grass with sleek muscles and eyes that gleamed gold in the sunlight. His steps were no longer clumsy, his energy no longer fragile. He had become, in every visible way, a young predator. Yet he remained tethered to Camila. Every morning, just as the mist still clung to the grass, the pair would begin their routine. Camila rose first, stretching her limbs before nudging the sleeping cub, though now he was less cub than adolescent awake. Atlas would yawn, revealing sharp teeth, then nudge her back with his head, a silent ritual that had become their greeting. Then they moved together. Camila led the way across the enclosure's soft terrain. She would pause to sniff a fallen branch or freeze at a distant bird call. Atlas mirrored her movements, crouching low when she did, ears pricked when she barked. Though she could not teach him to hunt in the way a leopard mother would, she taught him something just as valuable: how to be alert, how to listen, how to observe. One morning, while the team watched through the observation monitors, Camila stopped suddenly and growled, a low, warning rumble. Atlas froze behind her. A mongoose had darted out of the underbrush. It wasn't dangerous, but Camila's instincts told her to be cautious. What stunned the researchers wasn't the growl itself, but Atlas's reaction. He didn't pounce or chase. He looked to Camila. He waited for her cue. "He's modelling his behaviour after her," Hannah noted, scribbling in her notebook. Not as a leopard, but as her son. It was unlike anything they had documented before. As the days passed, their roles evolved. Camila still protected, still guided, but now Atlas began to explore alone. He would scale the low trees that lined the edge of the enclosure, testing the limits of his strength and balance. From those heights, he would gaze out at the reserve with the steady patience of a true predator, eyes scanning the horizon. Camila couldn't follow him up there. Instead, she'd sit at the base of the tree, waiting, watching, calm. They had developed a language of their own, glances, nudges, sounds. When night fell, they often rested together on a large rock near the center of their space. Camila curled up tightly, and Atlas would lay beside her, his body draped slightly over hers like a large, affectionate shadow. The scientists and caretakers, though deeply moved, knew what was coming. Wild animals, especially big cats, grow into their instincts. Around 8 months of age, leopard cubs in the wild begin separating from their mothers. They begin to roam, to seek out their own place in the world. It was a natural progression. But with Atlas, nothing had been natural. Nothing had followed the rule book. Still, Howard couldn't ignore it. "We have to start preparing," he told the team one morning. "Atlas is thriving, but if we don't encourage his natural instincts now, we risk stunting his development." "He's still bonded with Camila," Hannah said quietly. "Will he even leave her side?" Howard paused. "That's what we have to find out." The team proposed a gradual transition, introducing Atlas to other leopards within the reserve, slowly and under supervision. They would expand the enclosure to include a partitioned area, giving Atlas the opportunity to see, hear, and perhaps interact with his own kind. But they wouldn't separate him from Camila yet. Not completely. Not until he was ready. As they debated the next steps, an unexpected incident accelerated everything. It was a hot afternoon. The care team had prepared a special meal, fresh beef, divided into 2 portions as always, but in a moment of oversight, they only delivered one large portion to the center of the enclosure. Camila and Atlas were both nearby, lounging in the shade. As the scent of fresh meat reached them, both lifted their heads. Camila rose first, tail wagging slowly, expecting to share the meal as they always had. Atlas followed, but something was different. He didn't trot after her playfully. He moved with purpose. A low growl escaped his throat, deep, primal, new. The sound stilled the air. Then, in a flash, Atlas lunged forward and claimed the meat, his body tense, his head low over the prize. Camila approached, expecting the familiar ritual of shared feeding. But this time, Atlas didn't step aside. He let out another growl, sharper now, and used his shoulder to shove her back. The team watching from the monitors froze. Camila stumbled slightly, more from surprise than force. She looked at Atlas, confused. He stood over the meat, tearing into it with a focus and ferocity that no one had seen before. His eyes were wild, his muscles coiled. He looked like a leopard. Camila backed away, slow and quiet, settling near the edge of the enclosure. She didn't bark. She didn't challenge. She simply watched, her expression unreadable. Howard's heart sank. "It's starting," he said under his breath. But then, as quickly as the moment had escalated, it shifted. Atlas, after devouring most of the meat, paused. He turned his head toward Camila. Something flickered in his eyes. Remorse? Recognition? The team couldn't say. He walked slowly toward her, stopping a few feet away. His body language had softened. He reached out a paw and gently touched hers. Then, with deliberate care, he lowered his head and pressed it against her leg. Camila didn't move. The silence stretched. Then, finally, she leaned forward and touched his nose with her own, a soft, almost imperceptible gesture. The room watching erupted into quiet applause. The bond hadn't broken. It had simply evolved. That evening, the team reintroduced a second meal, smaller, meant only for Camila. As they placed it near the enclosure entrance, all eyes turned to Atlas. He didn't move. He remained beside Camila, sitting tall, tail twitching but restrained. He waited, watched. And when Camila rose and moved toward the food, he followed, but slowly, carefully. What happened next stunned them all. Camila picked up a large piece of meat, carried it back, and placed it gently at Atlas's feet. He stared at it, then nudged it back toward her, and they ate together. Not like a predator claiming dominance, but like family. That night, Howard made a note in his journal. Instincts are strong, but love is stronger still. The days that followed brought a quiet rhythm to the reserve. Atlas, now well past 8 months old, continued to grow at a remarkable pace. His legs had lengthened, his shoulders had widened, and the spots on his coat had deepened in contrast against the golden fur beneath. With every leap onto a rock or dash across the enclosure, he looked less like the fragile cub rescued from death and more like the apex predator he was born to become. And yet every morning, he still began his day at Camila's side. Their bond had deepened, not weakened. Even after the food incident, where instinct had flared momentarily, they had returned to their gentle routine. It was as if that moment of tension had marked a turning point, a line crossed, acknowledged, and then softened by mutual understanding. Atlas had begun to hunt. At first it was unintentional. A bird startled from the grass, a lizard caught mid-scamper. But over time, with careful exposure and patient guidance from the reserve staff, he began to refine his skills. They released rabbits into a secondary section of the enclosure, giving him space to practice. He stalked, waited, pounced. Sometimes he failed, but more often he succeeded. And each time he did, he brought the catch back to Camila. This behavior puzzled the researchers. In the wild, leopards didn't share their prey, especially not with unrelated animals. Yet here was Atlas, freshly triumphant, carrying a limp rabbit in his jaws, dropping it at Camila's feet. Not once, not twice, but again and again. She would sniff the offering, accept it, or gently push it back toward him. Sometimes they ate together. Other times, she simply watched him eat, her tail wagging in slow, thoughtful beats. It was maternal pride, the kind that transcended biology. But Howard knew the time was coming. He sat at his desk one morning, reviewing data on wild leopard behavior, the stages of independence, the hormonal triggers for territory establishment. Atlas, by all biological metrics, was ready for the next phase of life. The question wasn't whether he could survive on his own. It was whether he would. During a team meeting that afternoon, the conversation turned serious. "We've done everything we can in this setting," Howard said. "He's physically ready. He's developing the right instincts. But he's also deeply attached to Camila. If we wait too long, we might risk confusing that bond, holding him back." Hannah leaned forward. "So what's the plan?" "A staged introduction," he replied. "We bring in another leopard, a rescued female from the northern range. She's about his age, fully recovered. Let's see how he reacts. Give him time to observe, to decide." The others nodded, though the tension was clear. Introducing two young leopards, especially when one had been raised among humans and dogs, carried risks. Still, they proceeded. A neighbouring enclosure was prepared. The young female was brought in under sedation and allowed to wake naturally in the space next to Atlas's. She was healthy, alert and cautious, immediately taking to the high rocks and shaded corners. Atlas noticed her within minutes. He sat at the far fence, watching. At first his posture was rigid, ears high, tail twitching, but there was no growl, no aggression, just interest. He watched her for hours, his eyes following every movement. She ignored him at first, preoccupied with adjusting to her new surroundings, but after a few days she began to watch him back. Camila saw the change. She had always been intuitive, reading Atlas with an almost uncanny accuracy. Now, as he spent longer periods near the fence, less time by her side, she didn't interfere. She didn't bark or chase after him. She simply stood at a distance and waited, her expression calm. It was as if she understood. Sometimes, when Atlas lingered at the fence, nose pressed against the wire, Camila would quietly turn and walk away. She never sulked. She never forced a moment. She just gave him space. A week later, the team opened the gate between the enclosures. No fanfare, no coaxing. They simply removed the barrier and observed. Atlas was the first to move. He stepped into the new territory cautiously, ears flicking at every sound. The female leopard, standing atop a rock, froze when she saw him. Tension crackled in the air. But Atlas didn't growl. He didn't challenge. He approached with a slow, respectful posture, shoulders low, head turned slightly to the side, avoiding direct eye contact, and the female accepted him. They sniffed, circled, then, surprisingly, sat. Within minutes they were playing, bounding across the space, chasing, darting, testing each other's reflexes. The staff watched in disbelief. It was a smoother integration than anyone expected. That night, Camila rested alone for the first time in months. She lay near the large rock, her usual spot, staring into the shadows where Atlas and the female now moved together. She didn't pace. She didn't whine. But there was something in her eyes, a quiet ache, the weight of knowing. As the moon climbed higher, footsteps approached. Atlas, large now, his frame nearing that of a full-grown leopard, returned from the edge of the enclosure. He paused near Camila. For a moment he didn't move. Then, as if nothing had changed, he lay down beside her and pressed his head into her side. She responded immediately, licking the top of his head, just like she had when he was a cub. He purred. It wasn't the loud, rolling purr of a house cat, but a deep, vibrating sound, a rare, vulnerable expression in leopards. It resonated against the rock, through her chest, into the silence of the night, and in that moment, the truth was clear. Atlas hadn't forgotten. He had grown, he was discovering new parts of himself. But the bond they shared, the bond that began not with blood but with survival, with milk, with touch, it remained, stronger than instinct, beyond species, a thread that would not fray. The next morning, when the media arrived, Howard told them only the simplest version of the truth. He's meeting his kind now, he said. But he still comes back to her. And all across the world, people watched the videos, read the stories, and wept at something they didn't have words for. Because what they saw wasn't just animal behavior. It was something deeper. It was the story of a dog who had lost everything, and a cub who had never known what it meant to have someone. Together, they had written a new kind of family. And even as Atlas stepped toward the life he was meant to live, he never once let go of the one who gave him the chance to live it at all. Time moved differently at the Kruger Reserve. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months, yet for those who watched Camila and Atlas, every moment felt worth recording. Their story had begun as a miracle, a motherless cub and a grieving dog finding each other in the most improbable way. But what followed was something even rarer, a sustained bond, unbroken by the wild instincts that so often rewrite the rules of connection. By the time Atlas turned 1 year old, he was nearly indistinguishable from his wild-born counterparts. His shoulders were broad, his jaw powerful, and his movements fluid and precise. He could stalk silently, climb with ease, and pounce with frightening speed. There was no doubt now, Atlas was a true leopard. And yet, he was still Camila's. Each morning, long before visitors arrived, the pair emerged from the shaded den they shared. Camila, still spry despite the months of constant activity, trotted beside Atlas as they began their familiar path through the expanded enclosure. Atlas often darted ahead, leaping effortlessly onto boulders or scaling tree trunks for a better vantage point. Camila never followed him up, but she always waited at the base, keeping him in sight. When he descended, sometimes with a new scratch on his shoulder or a small rodent in his jaws, she would greet him with a nudge or a lick behind the ear. It was a dance they repeated every day, an echo of their earliest bond, now played out between two fully grown creatures from different worlds. The reserve had done its part to adapt. The team designed a new space, an enclosure large enough to give Atlas the freedom to practice hunting, tracking, and hiding, yet secure enough for Camila to stay safely within his orbit. The area included shallow ponds, hidden prey stations, climbing structures, and even a separate den for Atlas to use when he needed space. But no matter how far he roamed during the day, he always returned to her at night. One evening, after catching a hare in the tall grass, Atlas didn't eat it right away. He carried it carefully between his teeth, back through the trees, past the sun-dappled rocks, and laid it down in front of Camila. She sniffed it, looked at him, and then gently pushed it back. He nudged it forward again. She accepted. The staff documented everything. They had never seen behavior like this before in a leopard, particularly not in one with no biological link to the animal he was sharing food with. In the wild, leopards were solitary, possessive, but here something else had taken root. Compassion, memory, maybe even love. As Atlas continued to mature, the next step came naturally. The team introduced him to a young female leopard, rescued months earlier from an illegal trafficking attempt and fully recovered. At first, Atlas showed little interest. He observed her from a distance, more curious than engaged. But over time, instinct began to stir. He approached the fence more often, tail swaying slowly, eyes tracking her every movement. The female responded cautiously, but with growing interest. Camila watched it all. She never interfered, never barked or growled. Instead, she sat a few paces away, gaze calm, ears forward. If Atlas noticed her watching, he didn't let it stop him. He was moving forward now, in the way young males were meant to do. He was learning what it meant to be part of his own species. When the gate between the two areas was opened, the team held their breath. Atlas stepped through first. He approached the female slowly, carefully, posture respectful, movements deliberate. There were no signs of confusion or hesitation, no trace of dog behavior, only the language of leopards, scent, body angle, silent communication. It worked. The two leopards began to interact, at first cautiously, then playfully. A chase around the perimeter, a shared nap in the shaded grove. It was more than compatibility. It was progress. Atlas was beginning to take his place in the world he was born into. But he didn't forget. Even as he spent hours with the female, learning, playing, exploring, he returned to Camila each evening. Sometimes just for a moment, to nuzzle her shoulder, to lay beside her in silence, to rest his head on her flank the way he had as a cub. Other times, he stayed longer, falling asleep with her beneath the stars, the rhythmic sound of her breathing grounding him like it always had. Visitors from around the world flocked to the reserve. The story of Atlas and Camila had spread far beyond the borders of South Africa. News outlets picked it up. Documentaries were filmed. Footage of a leopard resting his head in the lap of a black mixed-breed dog circulated across social media like wildfire. People called it a miracle, a fable come to life. But for those who knew the full story, the sleepless nights, the medical emergencies, the quiet moments of doubt, it was something else. It was proof. Proof that love, in its truest form, is not bound by species or expectation. That compassion, once offered freely, can take root in the unlikeliest places. That healing is not always loud. It is often quiet, soft, and shaped by the smallest acts of care. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the savannah, Howard sat with Hannah on a rock overlooking the enclosure. Below them, Atlas lounged on a tree branch beside the female leopard, both drowsy in the fading light. Camila lay beneath the tree, her eyes half closed, her ears twitching occasionally at the sounds around her. Sometimes, Howard said, we try to define nature too strictly. We think we understand how it's supposed to work. Who belongs with whom? What's natural? Hannah nodded slowly. And then something like this happens. He smiled. and suddenly the rules don't matter so much. As the light faded completely, Atlas jumped down from the tree. The female leopard stayed behind, grooming herself lazily. Atlas, without hesitation, padded over to Camila and curled up beside her. She shifted slightly, letting him fit into the familiar curve of her body. Then, gently, she licked the top of his head. He purred. It wasn't an end. It wasn't even a farewell. It was a continuation, a new chapter in a story no one had expected, but everyone needed to believe in. A reminder that in the vast wild, amid survival and instinct, there was still room for grace, for devotion, for the kind of love that chooses you, even when it doesn't have to. And as the stars emerged one by one above the African sky, Camila and Atlas slept, together always, under a bond stronger than blood, deeper than biology, and truer than anything nature alone could have planned.